Welcome everyone to today's Trustee Restoration Council meeting. Today we have an update and NRDP update, and we're doing this hybrid. So make sure and, well, first let's do introductions, I guess, so everyone knows who's here. Here representing the governor's office, I'm Chris Hagum, Chief of Staff for the Governor, and chairing today's meeting.
Doug Martin with the Natural Resource Damage Program.
Harley Harris with the Natural Resource Damage Program.
Alex Sturhan, Policy Advisor for the Attorney General.
Christy, make sure you're speaking into the mic for those who aren't here.
Sorry about that. Christy Beal with the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Advisory Council.
Elizabeth Erickson with the Butte Natural Resource Damage Council.
And Amy Steinmetz with DEQ.
On the phone, I think we have a couple directors, if you wouldn't mind jumping in.
Sure. Hank Warsick, Director of Fish, Wildlife and Parks.
Director Castor was on and off maybe, so if she's back on, we'll introduce her then. All right. At this point, I want to remind folks that today's meeting is a hybrid meeting. So use your microphones so if those who are not in the room can hear us. Council members and the public, please wait until you're recognized by me to speak for that same reason. And please announce your name when you speak, so that way when for the record, everyone knows who's speaking at that moment. All right, with that, Doug Martin will give us the agenda for today.
Thank you. So today we do have a pretty full agenda. It's basically going, we'll start out where we got the introductions. Miranda will provide a financial update of both the Butte Area 1 and the Upper Clark Fork Restoration Funds. Then we'll move into the project updates, talking about our aquatic and terrestrial projects that have been completed in 2022. Moving on, we will do an update of the Parrot project, which is being funded out of both the Butte Area 1 and the Upper Clark Fork River Restoration Funds. And then we'll conclude with a summary of what we have set up for 2023 and the revision to the aquatic and terrestrial restoration plans. And with that, I will turn it over to Miranda to talk about the financial updates.
Just one more administrative thing, because I think we forgot to mention it. The meeting is being recorded and will be posted publicly on our website. So this is for the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Fund. The upper three lines are the beginning balances, and then we're looking at Butte groundwater, which has earned zero interest this fiscal year. It's expended approximately $630,000. It has accounted for none of the general expenses, and it's currently cash negative by about $677,000. The reason for this is because of the Parrot transfers, and we do anticipate that the money coming back from the Parrot leftover will cover the small amount that it's over. So the contract is not actually over budget, and that contract is finishing up the end of this month. So that should be covered by the Parrot, what's returned from the Parrot, from what was given to the Parrot from this.
Miranda, I'm sorry, can I ask, does that paper correspond with a page in our briefing packet?
Yes.
Do you know where?
It should be the first one after the financials, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So we're not going to talk about Anaconda groundwater because they've been complete for a couple of years. Next, we're moving on to Aquatics, which has earned 1.5 million in interest. It's expended 1.7 million this year and covered 590,000 of the general expenses and has a remaining balance of 36.6 million. Terrestrial, we're looking at 152,000, just over 152,000 in interest, 629,000 in expenses, covers almost 60,000 in the general expenses, and the remaining cash balance this year, or at the end of fiscal year 22, is 3.7 million. We have the aquatic reserves, which earned basically a $500,000 in interest and is sitting at 12.2 million. And then the terrestrial reserve, which earned approximately 215,000 in interest and is sitting at 5.23 million. We have other encumbered funds within this fund, which does not earn interest. It expended 1.59 million this year. It doesn't cover any of the general expenses and is sitting at 6.25 million. So overall, this fund is sitting at 63.4 million. Oh, sorry, there was one more click there. So then we're moving on to the Butte Area 1 Restoration Fund, and that's the next page in your packet. So Butte Area 1 has the mine waste area, which, yeah, that does have a pretty bad glare. Thank you for fixing that. Expended 146,000 this year, general expenses of 105,000, interest of 89,000, and is sitting at 2.1 million. Stream restoration, expenses of basically 2,000, general expenses of 85,000, interest of 72,000, and is sitting at 1.7 million. Then we have the municipal water system improvements, which had no expenses, direct expenses this year. Oh, sorry. Essentially 38,000 in expenses for general, 32,000 in interest, and 755,000 is what it's sitting at the beginning of 2023 fiscal year. The recreation category expended 2.7 thousand, 57,000 of general expenses, interest of 48,000, and is sitting at 1.1 million. Small projects expended just under 15,000, general expenses of 11,000, interest of just over 9,000, and is sitting at 221,000. So the overall Butte Area 1 fund is sitting at 5.9 million. We're going to be talking about the Parrot project later, so we're giving you just a brief overview of their financials. The total Parrot expenses is for fiscal year 22 is 5.3 million. General expenses of almost 60,000, interest of just under 30,000. Overall expenses of 26.9 million. General expenses of 220,000. Interest of 546,000. For the overall fund balance at the start of fiscal year 23 is 7.2 million. And then these are some of the other funds that NRDP oversees. So the Clark Fork River Restoration Fund is had revenues of 746,000, expenses of 1.8 million, and has a cash balance of 25.7 million. Oh, I did do that. Smelter Hill Uplands had revenues of 248,000, expenses of 233,000, and has a cash balance of 8.7 million. And then CFWIP had revenues of 5,000, expenses of 463,000, and has a cash balance of 1.2 million. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Miranda. Any questions in the room for Miranda? on the financial update? Questions from Christy or Elizabeth specifically?
None from Christy.
One quick one from Elizabeth. On the Smelter Hill Uplands Fund, does that include the 4 million that for Anaconda Deer Lodge County? That's included in the 8.
This is Doug. Yes, it does. That is the total fund balance, and the 4 million that would be potentially allocated to restoration with Anaconda is incorporated in that, is part of that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Are there any questions or comments from the public? Great, seeing none, and I will warn anybody from the public who is waiting for a specific time. We will be moving through this agenda as we move, and so I advise you to pay attention to where we are in the meeting. I will not be waiting for a specific time to attack a specific subject. So thank you for being prompt if you have a specific concern. Next, we have the UCFRB Aquatic Restoration Plan Annual Project and Monitoring Update by a cast of characters.
Yes, and Christy, as you said, it's a cast of characters. It is the Natural Resource Damage Program project managers that are all standing at this point in time and healthy, actually get a chance to present here. I just wanted to do a quick update. In your packet is a cost summary of the proposed actions that we have implemented both on the aquatic and terrestrial and recreation sides. Both the advisory council and the trustee council has asked for something like this, as well as this is going to lead in very well to the revision that we're going to talk about at the end. So basically, I'm just showing one of the tables, one of the 4 tables that is in your packet. And this actually shows the amount of funds that were actually allocated to each category or each of these priority areas, not only allocated in 2012, but also in 18. It shows also shows the amount that we've spent and the amount that's remaining. So that's all I wanted to talk about on this table. The project managers will go through and discuss how we have spent the money, but this is actually the tables that show how much was spent in each of those priority areas, not necessarily per project, but in those priority areas specifically. And then now I'm going to turn it over to Sydney Stewart, who is going to talk about the project table that was put together to help guide you through the update.
Okay. Brian asked me to just say if anyone on Teams has questions to raise your hand, and then we'll allow you to ask a question. Okay, so I'm Sydney Stewart. I'm a project manager with NRDP. I'm just going to give a little refresher and background on the restoration plans, but we wanted to start with acknowledging our project partners. We couldn't do all the work in the Upper Clark Fork River Basin, sorry, without help from all of our project partners. So a lot of our work is done on private land, which means working and collaborating with landowners and water users. We have a lot of support from Clark Fork Coalition, Trout Unlimited, and Watershed Restoration Coalition in working with those landowners and pushing projects forward. And then we also work with other entities like the tribes, state and federal agencies, and city and county governments. So these are the restoration goals for aquatic resources in the restoration plan. These are to restore the main stem trout fishery, replace lost trout angling, and maintain or improve native trout populations in the Upper Clark Fork River Basin. We implement our projects in priority tributary watersheds. So FWP prioritized these tributaries as how they can help the trout fishery in the main stem Clark Fork. And we use these prioritized tributaries for implementing our projects. We have 5 major project types for aquatic resources: flow augmentation, which Brian will talk about next, and then fish entrainment, fish passage, riparian habitat, and in-stream habitat, which Nathan will talk about. Moving to the terrestrial restoration plan, these goals are aimed at restoring and replacing the injured resources and their services. Similar to the aquatic plan, we implement these projects in priority terrestrial areas, and these areas were also prioritized by FWP. Restoration projects for terrestrial areas fall into 2 main categories. We have lands projects, which are public land acquisitions and conservation easements, and then habitat enhancement projects, which focus on enhancing terrestrial habitats. So I think Doug mentioned, as part of the packet this year, we have these project summary tables. There are 3 tables, one for aquatics, one for terrestrial, and one for recreation. There's a lot of information in them, so I just wanted to throw them up really quick and walk through them. This is the aquatic. It's the most complicated one. You'll notice that it's organized by priority watershed, which is the same as the way the packet's organized. And then each project that's listed here should have a narrative update in the packet. So projects highlighted yellow have an update in 2022, and projects highlighted green were completed in 2022. And the next couple columns just refer to the type of project that it is. So for example, the McQuarrie Ranch had a fish passage and fish entrainment project. The project status refers to the status of the project as of right now, the end of 2022. So a filled circle means the project is complete. A circle with a line through it means the project is in progress. And an open circle is a conceptual project. Project performance monitoring refers to someone, NRDP, or our project partners going to completed projects and making sure they're still there and still functioning and helping us achieve our restoration goals. So an X in this column would mean that in 2022, NRDP or our project partners went and took a look and made sure that project was still there. An NA is for projects that aren't complete yet, so monitoring is not applicable. And TBP is our abbreviation for to be performed, so that's for projects that were completed in 2022, and we will conduct monitoring on them in the future. And a blank cell here would mean that there's no monitoring being done. So the next couple of columns are fish monitoring, and Nathan's going to talk a lot more about this, but I'll just give a kind of brief background. Their FWP does fish monitoring at 3 different levels. So the basin level is for Silverbow Creek and the main stem Clark Fork, where they have monitoring points throughout those basins. The watershed level is various monitoring points throughout a specific tributary watershed. And then the project level would be monitoring being conducted around a specific project to help us evaluate how it's working. So an X in one of these columns would mean that project FWP conducted monitoring in 2022 at that level in that area. But FWP doesn't do monitoring at every level for every area every year. So we added this kind of asterisk symbol to indicate that monitoring wasn't done in 2022, but it is being done as part of the overall monitoring plan. And then TBP is the same, to be performed, for projects that were recently completed. And then the final column is O&M, operations and maintenance. So an X here would mean that operations and maintenance activities were conducted in 2022. NA again is for projects that aren't complete, so it's not applicable. And then TBP for projects that were recently completed and will be maintained in the future. And then just jumping quickly to the terrestrial, it's a very similar table. The fisheries monitoring is not relevant, so we don't have those columns here. And then the only other main difference is that it's split into project types. So we have lands projects and then habitat enhancement projects split out. And the reason that we did that is because sometimes we have both types of projects in one area. So for example, the Clark Fork River Ranch was a lands project, but it also has habitat enhancement projects. And so we wanted to be able to show the different statuses of those 2 different types of projects. And then finally, the recreation table is the simplest one. just project status, monitoring, and maintenance. So are there any questions? Okay, then Brian?
Hello, I'm Brian Barkoyak with the Natural Resource Damage Program, and I get to give the Aquatic Flow project update. Just a little reminder of our priority areas. The highest priority is the main stem Clark Fork between Warm Springs and Deer Lodge, the most dewatered section. Second in priority are priority tributaries within the injured area. Third in priority are priority tributaries outside of the injured area. Just an overview, these are the monitoring locations I'll be talking about today. These are not all the locations we monitor, but just the ones I'll be talking about. On the main stem, Clark Fork from upstream to downstream is the Clark Fork River at Galen Gauge. Just downstream of that is Clark Fork River at Galen Road, and then Clark Fork River at Gemback Road, Clark Fork River at Sager Lane, and Clark Fork River at Deer Lodge. The only tributary I'll be talking about today is the Warm Springs Creek station below the Gardner Ditch. I'm going to show a series of graphs. They're all very similar on the vertical or y-axis. On the left-hand side, we have flow. On the right-hand side, we have temperature. Across the bottom on the horizontal axis is the date. It was a fairly unusual water year. We had very, very low flows coming into spring runoff. We had decent rain in May and June, which kind of led to a fairly normal, fairly average peak flow. But then it seems like the precipitation shut off at the end of June, and flows kind of dropped and temperature increased. What we're seeing here is the farthest upstream gauge, the gauge at Galen, the USGS gauge at Galen, where we were hovering around our flow targets, but dipped below them for about 23 days. Looking at temperature targets, or 20 degrees C, which is above 20 degrees Celsius, which is harmful to trout. We were above those temperature targets for about 33 days this year. Looking at the downstream gauge, the gauge at Deer Lodge, we can see it's a very similar pattern, low flows, normal spring runoff, but the magnitude of both the days we didn't meet our flow targets was higher, and then the days above our temperature targets was higher as well. Looking at some of the monitoring our project partners, Clark Fork Coalition and Trout Unlimited do. Between these gauges, these are the hydrographs for Gemback Road and Sager Lane. We were significantly below our flow targets at these areas, and low flows as low as 20 CFS, where our targets are in the 50 CFS to 60 CFS range. Similar trend with temperature. As flows drop, temperature obviously goes up. And looking at the Sager Lane station, we've had almost 60 days above our temperature targets. This is showing that, the area of focus, or the main stem Clark Fork in the dewatered reach, is still the main emphasis for our flow enhancement. Looking at tributaries, this is Warm Springs Creek, similar pattern. We did dip below target flows for a few days, but you can see the graph on the right is temperature, and temperature is staying on these tributaries is staying cold. So our program of bringing more cold water into the main stem, these are the type of activities we need to continue to do, bring more cold water into the main stem Clark Fork. It's not all gloom and doom or dry and warm. Looking at the Galen Road gauge, this is the only station that we actually did meet temperature and flow targets for the entire of the season. This is most likely as a result of a lot of our flow projects. This is a map showing our flow projects. The first you could see the call out just above the first red dot. We have 3 projects there. We have in-stream flow rights that were converted by the Clark Fork Coalition to in-stream flow. We have change applications that are currently underway with water rights from the former Deer Lodge River Ranch, which we retain for in-stream flow purposes. And then we have a project we're doing in conjunction with DEQ, taking the last water user on a ditch and turning that into a pipeline system. So that's where a lot of our flow projects have been targeted. I don't think it's coincidence that that is where we're meeting our flow targets as well. Other flow projects we have been working on with our project partners and other state agencies are converting water rights associated with Dry Cottonwood Creek to in-stream flow, Racetrack Pond to in-stream flow. And I'd like to thank the Clark Fork Coalition. After 10 years, we've had our first successful release from Racetrack Lake this year, which was a stored water right that was purchased in conjunction with the Columbia Basin Water Transaction Program over 10 years ago. So it's been a long time in the making, but we did get some cool cold water to the main stem Clark Fork this year. Some other flow projects just to talk about. This council, along with the governor, did approve a water lease with the Rock Creek Cattle Company that was implemented this year. Snorkel monitoring by FWP showed thousands of fish stacked up at the confluence of Rock Creek and the main stem, showing that it is providing some cold water refuge to fish in late summer. We are working on a study with University of Montana examining what people think about split season leasing and whether that's a viable option for flow enhancements. And then we did purchase a ranch a few years ago. The Clark Fork River Ranch has associated water rights. We've been working on those water rights and also with our neighbors on that same ditch. And we have a split season lease with them that they are able to use our pivots and pasture in early summer in return for them shutting off their water use in late summer. That's actually been going very well, and the third water user on that ditch has approached us for a similar project. One of the big initiatives that we started last year that we're very proud of is the Clark Fork River Stream Flow Group. This is a group made up of water users, landowners, Clark Fork Coalition, local counties, and the mission is to pursue solutions that support and balance the water needs of the upper Clark Fork River watershed communities. We're looking at a lot of projects. We're actually looking at leveraging some Bureau of Reclamation money to look at other projects. We're looking at headwater storage. We're looking at coming up with a water balance for the upper Clark Fork. And we're also looking at, as I mentioned before, split season leases and other opportunities for water savings and water management in the upper Clark Fork. Of course, we have, that's just a very brief summary of our flow projects. There's a lot more information in your packets. And in terms of monitoring data, there's a lot more information on our website, and there more coming as our flow reports from this year are being completed, and we'll get those posted. And with that, I think we can turn it over to questions on flow projects.
Any questions in the room for Brian? Christy, Elizabeth, you get special call out. Are there any questions from the public or online? Great. Is that all for?
Yep.
Okay, for Brian. Now, yeah, next, Nathan.
Hello, I'm Nathan Cook. I'm going to be talking today about the aquatic non-flow projects as well as the aquatic fisheries monitoring that we work with FWP on in the upper Clark Fork River Basin. These are projects, restoration projects that occur in the priority tributaries in the upper Clark Fork River Basin. These tributaries were selected as priorities in conjunction with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. There's too many projects to talk about them all today, although the details on every project can be found in your meeting packets. I'm going to focus on two projects that I think represent the kind of work we did in 2022. The first is one of the projects where we actually completed construction in 2022, the Aspen Grove Phase 2 on Cottonwood Creek near Deer Lodge. And I'll talk more about that on my next slide. And we had a whole lot of projects this year that were in design development phase. 2022 just happened to be a year where a lot of these projects were being developed and designed. And we also spent a lot of time in 2022 working on O&M of existing projects as well as monitoring. And I'm going to highlight a project on Flint Creek that I worked quite a bit on the O&M and monitoring end called the Allendale Fish Screen and Fish Passage Project. So again, the Aspen Grove Phase 2 project was one we completed construction on just this past November. And it combined 2 irrigation ditches into one, and it completely eliminated 1 diversion. So that dramatically improved fish passage. We also installed a new head gate and FCA fish screen. Again, a fish screen is just a structure that keeps fish from being entrained or sucked into irrigation canals. And we also replaced about 1 mile of leaky irrigation ditch with a pipeline. So this had a lot of benefit to the resource. We were keeping fish out of the ditch, improved upstream fish passage, but it also provided the irrigator with an easier infrastructure to get his irrigation water, as well as a more efficient system. Like I said, along with our project partners, we spent a lot of time on O&M of existing projects. And one that I worked on in particular was the Allendale Fish Screen and Passage project on Flint Creek. It was completed in 2021. And it was actually a large, pretty complex project. So the picture on the lower right there, you can see, if you look closely, there's 4 different fish screens there. One kind of long one, and then some sort of smaller rectangular ones. 4 screens on 4 different ditches. And we also replaced 2 diversion structures with more fish-friendly diversion structures. And again, that was completed in 2021, so 2022 was the first full irrigation season we had with all this new equipment. So we worked really closely along with Trout Unlimited and the water users on making sure this stuff was running like it should, made sure we were screening fish and making sure that users got their water. And for the most part, it was successful. The irrigators were pretty happy with their new equipment, and the fish were being kept out of the irrigation canals. And we know that because we spent a lot of time working with FWP on fish monitoring around this project. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute here. But that relationship we have with FWP is one of the primary ways we look at how are we meeting those restoration goals, those 3 aquatic restoration goals that Sydney mentioned. You know, they all had the word trout in them. So trout are the focus of our restoration efforts. So we have a cooperative agreement with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and we provide funding to do additional monitoring around restoration. And like Sydney said, FWP monitors on what we think about 3 different spatial scales: the basin or the main stem scale, the priority tributary or watershed scale, and then the project scale. And I'll talk a little about each one of those a little bit. So for the main stem scale, that's electrofishing on the main stem of the Clark Fork River and Silverbow Creek. And FWP samples, they do trout population estimates on 7 sections of the Clark Fork River every spring, usually in April. It can be pretty snowy like in this picture, but they do 7 sections every spring. It's a fair amount of effort. But I think we've learned a lot from this monitoring. And one of the things we've learned is, where are trout from the Clark Fork River coming from? What are the sources of trout into the Clark Fork River? Because again, that's one of our goals, is to get more trout in the Clark Fork River. And we've learned that the main stem itself is a source of trout, as well as the tributaries are also spawning in rearing areas. And those tributaries are the ones that we've selected as priorities for restoration actions. Then we've also learned that brown trout population, especially upstream of Deer Lodge, is really reliant on flow conditions. So what you're looking at here is a graph depicting a model that I came up with a few years ago where the number of fish that FWP captures in their electrofishing survey, in this case, it's their most upstream section they call the pH section. The number of fish captured is on the vertical axis, and then minimum flows and CFS are on the horizontal axis. And it's not minimum flows during the year that FWP is out there sampling, it's minimum flows 3 years before that. So the number on these data points here, that's the year of the survey, but the flows are 3 years before that. And what we found is that these minimum flow conditions 3 years ago were really important because that's the year when those fish were in their first year of age. They're small and very vulnerable to the environmental conditions in the main stem. And that relationship between previous flow conditions and fish abundance, as indicated by FWP's sampling, was really strong for about 13 years. But in more recent years, we've seen the population just remain relatively low, regardless of flow conditions. And this is a little bit concerning because we understand what's driving these populations. It used to be flow conditions. Now, flow conditions don't seem to be as much of a driver of high population numbers. So like I said, this was a concern to us as well as FWP. So we kind of convened a meeting of pretty much every smart aquatic ecologist we could find back in February. We got university professors and students and our NGO partners and agency partners, and we all got together and said, okay, what is going on with this population? Why are the numbers just not bouncing back like they used to? And one of the things that came out of that meeting was a study that FWP worked on along with some researchers at USGS, and they looked at brown trout population trends across the state in big rivers, and they saw that other rivers like the Big Hole, the Beaverhead, some of their brown trout populations showed very similar trends to the Upper Clark Fork River. So it's not just the Upper Clark Fork River that is down in terms of brown trout numbers. Of course, the Upper Clark Fork has its own unique set of limiting factors. There's metal contamination, there's the cleanup going on, there's nutrient pollution, those other things. But another thing we talked about is that regardless of what the drivers are, the kind of restoration projects we're working on are very much in line with addressing what we understand is the most important limiting factors of this population. So that was the basin or main stem monitoring scale. The watershed monitoring scale focuses on those priority tributaries. And the focus of this kind of monitoring initially was to get baseline data prior to restoration actions as many places as we could. We didn't know exactly where we'd be doing restoration or what we'd be working on, but we wanted to get baseline data spread out throughout the basin. So FWP sampled about 80 different sites in 25 different tributaries for 3 years. And now those same sites are sampled every 2 years in the larger tributaries and every 3 to 5 years in some of the smaller tributaries. And what these kind of data have showed us is that we've seen immediate responses to restoration actions in small watersheds. And these graphs show an example of that on Harvey Creek, which, if I go back, actually, is this one right? Oh, I can't see that. Okay, it's this one, number 24. A small tributary upstream of Rock Creek on the Clark Fork River. And what we saw in Harvey Creek, which had a whole bunch of different restoration approaches. We did put in a fish screen, we consolidated irrigation ditches, we did irrigation efficiency improvements and put that water savings back in stream for the fish. And we saw some pretty dramatic changes right away. For instance, this particular sampling section here, the River Mile 1.6 section, these graphs are showing you trout per 100 meters. Our sections are about 100 meters long over time for West Slope cutthroat trout, the blue bars, and bull trout, the orange bars. And we saw a big bump in that West Slope cutthroat trout population in that section just downstream of the fish screen after it was installed in 2014. And another encouraging trend we've been seeing is we've been seeing bull trout pop up in parts of Harvey Creek where we had not previously seen them in our monitoring. And again, these are all within the restoration project area. So to be able to see bull trout recolonizing and establish a population in Harvey Creek is really encouraging. However, we don't see such dramatic changes in our monitoring data on the larger watersheds, and that tells us that we just may need to monitor them longer, or we may need to do more restoration actions in those bigger watersheds. That's hard to see. I think that says project monitoring, Flint Creek fish screens, and diversion projects. So on the project scale, we simply can't monitor every project out there. There's just too many. So we try to select projects where we can learn lessons we can apply to future projects, maybe in different watersheds that are similar. And this particular project, the Allendale project, again, was a big, expensive, complicated project that generally has been successful. And again, we know that partially through this FWP sampling. And FWP has been anticipating this project coming down the pipe and started tagging fish back as early as 2015. So now there's over 1,000 fish tagged in Flint Creek as well as the Clark Fork River surrounding this project. And FWP is looking at how many of those fish are entrained or end up in irrigation canals, and how are they using these new structures for fish passage. And what we've seen is that native fish coming from as far away as the Clark Fork River, which is 12 miles downstream of Allendale, they're using these new fish screens and benefiting from these fish screens. And I have also seen fish using the new diversion structures for upstream fish passage, and that up on the upper right there, that's one of the new diversion structures. We've also seen, some of those rocks and boulders in those structures kind of move around with high flows, so we're keeping our eye on that to make sure we don't need to tweak anything to make upstream fish passage even better. But we're still studying how fish that are saved through these fish screening projects, what happens to them once they're back in the river? So what happens to these fish once they're back in Flint Creek, for instance? Do they contribute to the population? How far do they go? And we're hoping data like this will help us prioritize future projects. There's a very similar study FWP is doing on Cottonwood Creek as well, tagging a bunch of fish. Both the Cottonwood Creek and the Flint Creek monitoring will be going on through 2023, so they're very much preliminary studies at this point. So I ran through the monitoring as quickly as I could, but if you want more details, they're available on FWP's FishMT website. You can go to FishMT and look under reports and search Upper Clark Fork River, or just come talk to me, or I'd be happy to answer any questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. I just wanted to say thank you to the team because I feel like the information that's contained in this year's report is much more transparent for those of us who don't work on it every day. I know that was not done. It wasn't easy to make happen. So thank you for being responsive to our concerns or just questions in previous meetings that we wanted more project level detail about financial contributions to different areas, and also how are we determining where to make the next investment, and what is the monitoring and that happens. And I think that you've gone to great effort to make sure that those questions of ours were answered. So that is my initial comment. In the members of the Trustee Restoration Council, do you have any additional comments?
I just wanted to add, this is Christy Beal. I wanted to add an additional comment that I thought I applaud you on your efforts to reach out to others also who are doing some of these studies and trying to coordinate some of that information, because I think every one of those studies then, including the efforts, both time and money spent by this program, are enhanced because of that sharing of, and crossover of information.
I guess This is Elizabeth. I have a quick question for Nathan. You talked about the decrease in brown trout across Montana rivers. Is the magnitude of that decrease in the Clark Fork similar to to what we're seeing in some of those other rivers too?
That's a great question, and no, it's more dramatic.
Okay.
Whereas in other rivers, populations are down, you know, a half of average numbers. Clark Fork River, we're dealing with about a third to a quarter of the average population right now, and it's just not bouncing back. And we want to know why.
Thank you.
Are there any questions in the room or online from the public? Brian, do we have anyone raised hands? Seeing none, thank you for your reports, and we will move on to what's going to be Ray, but now it will be Doug's Terrestrial and Recreation Restoration Plans Annual Project and Monitoring Update.
Thank you. Yes, this is Doug Martin. I'm going to provide the terrestrial project update. Stepping in for Ray, who, as I said earlier, called in sick. That's how you can leave there. Right? Okay. So once again, the terrestrial projects, much like the aquatic projects, are based in priority terrestrial areas that were identified previously by Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and other experts. And this is where we are implementing our both our lands projects and our habitat enhancement projects. Lands projects, we didn't have any new lands projects this year, but we did do monitoring on the projects that we had previously purchased either fee title or placed conservation easements on. There were 3 additions to the Garrity Mountain area just west of Anaconda, and that's shown in the blue at the lower left-hand corner of the map. This is the Garrity Mountain Wildlife Management Area. The 3 projects that were added here, about 1,400 acres. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks manages this as a wildlife management area. So as far as the monitoring and maintenance, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks does complete those activities at this site. We do know that one requirement or one action that Fish, Wildlife, and Parks had to do was create an access site along Warm Springs Creek at the Stumptown area, and this has been completed. On the conservation easements that we have worked on since 2012 in the Upper Clark Fork, there are the Box Farm, which is over by Maxville, the Gravely Conservation Easement, which is just north of Garrison. Then you have the Cottonwood Creek Ranch, which is along the main stem of the Clark Fork River. These are owned, or these are managed by, the conservation easements are managed by Land Trust, Five Valleys, or the Montana Land Reliance. So they are responsible for maintaining the conservation easements or ensuring that the landowners are complying with the requirements. Ray Vinke did accompany the Land Trust on their inspections of these, and everything was up to date on this. One note here that we do require that the conservation easements provide public access. Most of the conservation easements, or actually all of these conservation easements, are enrolled in Fish, Wildlife, and Parks Block Management Program. And in 2021, we have data from 2021, not 22 yet, about 3,500 days were utilized or reported in these conservation easements in the Upper Clark Fork. One of the other lands projects that was actually out, it's the one in yellow here, that's the Clark Fork River Ranch just south of Deer Lodge. This project was an acquisition that is state-owned property and currently managed by the Natural Resource Damage Program. The main reason we're still holding it is because of the 5 miles of the Clark Fork River where remediation and restoration activities have to take place. So state-owned property is easier to implement remedy and restoration on. We do have a ranch management plan, which we do use to manage this property. And in I guess in 2021, There were about 470 hunter days of hunter access, and this is actually pretty important because previously the landowner did not allow public to access this property. So it's some new hunter or new access days that are allowed there. As far as the activities that we implemented in 2022, they're all associated with the management plan. We do operate it as a ranch. So Brian and Ray actually work with some of the neighbors and the local ranchers there where they are leasing some of the property out for cattle grazing, as well as some irrigated hay ground where Brian is working on the flow project he talked about to try to get additional flow to the Clark Fork. So it is an operating property that is actively ranched in the Clark Fork. As I said, we have the ranch management plan that we're currently working on for the grazing, doing fencing, and also weed control throughout. The other types of projects that we work on in the terrestrial plan are actually habitat enhancement projects. And in those priority areas are all private land or state-owned land. Federal lands are not part of the priority area. So the habitat enhancement projects take place on private or state-owned properties within the Upper Clark Fork. The dots on this map all indicate places where we have done habitat enhancement projects in the past. The two circled DNRC properties are where we actually did some work last year in 2022. There were some spring developments, about total between these two projects, about 2 miles of riparian fencing that was completed, as well as some off-stream water activities. We did do much like Nathan talked about on the aquatics. There was a bunch of or several projects where we are in development that will be implemented next year or the following year, depending on landowner cooperation. But we do have 3 ranches that we continue to work on in priority areas to implement habitat restoration projects or enhancement projects. Off-stream water, riparian fencing, conifer encroachment, and biological weed control are the activities that we're looking at here. And these activities not only benefit the wildlife populations to help us replace those lost services, but they also do help with the rancher and their ranching operations and do provide enhancement to their operations as well. This is an important point that one of the advisory council members brought up to us, is that, we need to echo more of, why the ranchers are working with us. What benefits do these projects also provide to them? That might be a good way for us to reach out to some of these landowners. As far as the monitoring that we actually do, we do a lot of the monitoring, some of it by ourselves and a lot with our partners. As I mentioned, as I went through the different lands projects, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks does manage and monitor the wildlife management areas. The conservation easements are monitored by the Land Trust. The Clark Fork River Ranch, which we hold title to, is monitored by NRDP using our ranch management plan. Our habitat enhancement projects that I just talked about are monitored by ourselves and also our partners, Trout Unlimited and the Watershed Restoration Coalition. What have we learned from these? In a nutshell, if you look at the goals of our restoration plan, the lands projects are meeting those goals. We are either restoring or replacing those lost services. On the enhancement project side of things, a couple of the things that we've learned is that long-term operation and maintenance is required for these projects. If you, for example, we know that riparian fencing is very, there's a long record that riparian fencing actually helps improve the riparian zones and the habitat there. Our monitoring has showed us, though, that we do need to make sure that we keep up with the agreements that we have with the landowners to ensure that those fences or those water gaps that are put in are maintained, so that those protections that the fencing is creating are maintained into for the long term. Conifer encroachment and the conifer removal from riparian areas we've also found has been very effective. And we've also found that it's something that we can integrate very effectively with DEQ on the Clark Fork remediation, where there is a lot of wood needed there for stream bank construction. So we're cooperating with DEQ to try to dovetail our terrestrial projects with DEQ's cleanup work and NRD's restoration work so that we can get some extra cost benefits there. Stream water development or off-stream water development. This is something that we need to continue to monitor because we're kind of finding mixed success with the types of stream development that we're using, and we're not seeing overwhelming evidence that one is better than the other. So I am going to step right into the recreation projects, and then we'll finish up with questions on both of those if that works. In 2012, 6 recreation projects were approved for funding. In the 2015 revision and in the 2019 revision, no new recreation projects were recommended. And so it's just these 6 that were originally funded that are in the restoration plan. And 4 have been completed. Actually, 3 were completed prior to 2022. A 4th one was completed in 2022, and that was the old Yellowstone Trail. Powell County constructed this trail. It's 11 miles from Deer Lodge down to Garrison along an old railroad bed. One thing that we've noted that Powell County has indicated at the AC meeting that they are going to be stepping up and taking care of the operation and maintenance on this trail for the long term. The other 2 projects that are still have funding and have not been completed is one is the Milltown State Park. This is some funding that was provided. The Milltown or the FWP manages Milltown and uses the funds to develop additional visitor resources at the site. And it has been noted that over the last several years, Milltown has seen a steady increase in visitation. Fishing access sites, Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. We work with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to help develop new access along the Clark Fork River. It's becoming more and more interest. There's a higher interest in using the river these days. FWP was working on developing 2 sites just north of Deer Lodge, one about 4 miles north, the vet clinic, and the other one is called Coors Bend, which is about 7 or 8 miles north of Deer Lodge. And this is a picture of the old Yellowstone Trail that's been recently, as I said, completed. It starts in Deer Lodge near the Grand Coors Ranch and goes down to Garrison, right there where the interstate goes by Garrison. That's where it ends. Very neat little state or trail that you can ride your bike on or your horse on even. So. With that, I will take questions of both terrestrial or recreation projects.
Any questions in the room? I had one question. Doug, when and understanding this is not your presentation, we can get back to it later. But how many have there been a number of trail projects that have been done with these dollars?
Yes, there have. So if we go back to the grants program, there were several projects within the grants program that were funded. So we have this one, and there's other, and we could break it down for you more. There are other actually parks. For instance, there's several parks in Butte. There's a park in Anaconda that also had trail systems associated with them, but specific trails. There's this one, the Greenway Service District, which was funded through the grants program. Those are the 2 just trail projects. Others were associated with parks.
Okay.
So,
thank you. Questions in the room? Christy, Elizabeth, do we have any public comment questions? Hands raised, hearts smiling. Okay. Great. Thank you, Doug, for that update. And next we will have the Parrot Tailings guest hosted by Harley. Jim Ford unable to today.
Thank you, Chris, and members of the TRC. For the record, I'm reverting to my old lawyer days. I'm Harley Harris. I'm the program manager. And as Chris indicated, I'm pinch hitting for Jim Ford, who's the project manager for the Parrot project, along with our team of Catherine and Pat Canine in Butte. So let's see, how do we just push that one? That's the advance. Okay, so I'm kind of winging it here. It's going to be a shorter presentation probably than you would have gotten from Jim, and probably a little less information, but I'll just try and give you an update on where we're at with this project. It's been a major project for the program, a major project for the state of Montana, a major cleanup project. It is actually fairly advanced in its progression. We're nearing the end, and I'll have some of that news in just a second. So I guess the first thing, and I know you've probably heard this before, I apologize if I'm being repetitive, but why are we doing this? I mean, what was the project all about? This first slide really sort of, in one slide, kind of encapsulates the reason for this project. So the project area, you can kind of see in this next slide, and I'm going to probably go back to the prior one. Just the point to make here is if you look at that water ponded in the bottom, that's blue. Blue is copper and zinc. I'm looking at Elizabeth, my pinch hitting technical expert. So historically in this area, we're right behind an up gradient from the Butte Civic Center and down gradient from the Berkeley Pit and the Montana Resources active mine area. Historically, this was the site of the old Parrot smelter, which was in operation at the turn of the century for not quite 2 decades. Basically what happened back then is, the original smelter was built basically on the banks of Silverbow Creek, and there was a wetland there, and all of the tailings, when they were done with the smelting process, were just basically carted out, literally in little hand carts, and dumped into the creek or along the creek and spread out throughout there. So a huge source of contaminated mine tailings and wastes were collected there. Over time, when they opened up the Berkeley Pit, actually those wastes and tailings were covered with overburden from the Berkeley Pit and kind of became out of sight, out of mind. They were buried and kind of lost to at least the visual experience of folks. But we knew from sampling and from work of the Montana Bureau of Mines and our program and others that those tailings were sitting in groundwater, and the groundwater was running through there, getting highly contaminated, and then expressing itself down gradient in Blacktail Creek and Silverbow Creek and causing some huge problems. So without getting into the complicated backstory about how the state came to do it, the state did come to the point where, basically EPA was not going to require Atlantic Richfield to do it. So the state stepped up and said, we're going to do it, we're going to treat it, we're going to do it with restoration dollars and treat it as a restoration project. So that's also why we got tagged or assigned the responsibility. So anyway, this slide just sort of shows the general layout of the project. I mean, lower left here, red and green are the basic project areas. The red crosshatch is where we excavated tailings and dug them up and moved them elsewhere. The green area is also an area where there were tailings, but those tailings in this area were not in the water table. They were sitting above the water table, so they were not actually contaminating groundwater. They were there and they needed to be isolated because of surface infiltration, but we didn't need to dig them up because they weren't actively contaminating. So you'll hear me in a little bit explain, we've capped that, but part of the project is to put a cap on the green area as well as the red area when we're done. This project would not have occurred, would not have been a success if it were not for the cooperation and partnership of Montana Resources. One of the biggest issues that we ran into from the beginning in configuring the project and designing it is, where are we going to put the waste, number one, and how are we going to get it there? There are a number of different alternatives in and around Butte, none of them great. I mean, the mine waste repository, which is an EPA designated repository, is way up on the hill and would have required running trucks right through downtown Butte. Not a great idea. So long and short of it is we work with MR and have a cooperative agreement with Montana Resources where basically the wastes go back into the active mine site. And some of them are reprocessed by MR, some of them are just incorporated into their existing dumps throughout. And then the other benefit to doing this, since we were immediately adjacent to Montana Resources, is we did not have to use public streets. We were able to stay off of any public road, except for some backfill hauling, which I'll get to in a second. But we were able to stay off and use bigger equipment, which in turn created greater efficiencies as well. So this just shows, the project area, and then there's two different kind of dump sites we had on Montana Resources. They exist for different reasons, which is probably too much detail for this presentation. What we've been working on this summer is what's called Phase 2C. It's what's bounded in the red. Phase 2A is a completed phase we did a couple summers ago. But 2C is, and you can see this is an old photo pre-project. You can see what was there originally was the Butte Silverbow shop complex. That's part of the project, was taking those down and moving Butte Silverbow elsewhere. One of the things that occurred this year, just as an annual update, is we had an opportunity, again, working with Montana Resources to locate a backfill source that's nearer to the site. Our other backfill source is kind of west of Butte and did involve some surface road trucking. We did reach an agreement working with our contractor and with Montana Resources to find a site. It's called the Lunchroom Borrow Site. So it was just a development in the project this year. It saved money for both the contractor and the state, and actually kept trucks off the road. So it was a win-win, we thought. Yeah, here's kind of the win-win piece of it. We reduced almost 136,000 cubic yards of backfill that we had to haul through town. So that's 20,000 trucks. So that's a benefit to the community. And then again, as I said, it saved us some money. So that was just sort of an opportunistic tweak in a big project. We jumped on that and got it done. So am I going forward? That's similar. I don't know exactly what, in addition, Jim was going to talk about here, but this Phase 2C where we worked this summer. Oh, okay. There we go. I didn't know that was going to happen. The green area is another opportunistic thing. As we were kind of working in Phase 2C, there's tailings under there. You can see the Civic Center, and I mean, we had an opportunity to get in there, and I can't get into the details of how this evolved, but basically that's where we've been working, and that's the last bit of tailings that we've been removing is in that area. That's all getting buttoned up now as we speak. We had to do a lot of coordination lately with Hollywood. They're filming movies there now, or TV shows, which is added to the intrigue and interest of this project. It's had quite a few little wrinkles throughout. Yeah, well, you can see the movie trailers there. There's just some sites or pictures of the project, drone pictures. This is back in October. You can see on the left, that's the first phase of excavation. They're actually putting in the top material, and I'm going to mess some of this up. Jim could explain exactly what these things are. On the right, the more brown stuff is this year's excavation. They're still kind of backfilling and recontouring and so on. Overall, this is a good aerial because, overall, one of the things that you can actually visually see the results of this project, because before we started, right at the back of Civic Center was about a 10 to 12 foot ramp where the road and the topography actually went up, because that's what was left there, piled up there, is the tailings and the overburden. It's all going to be at grade now through there. I mean, that's how much material we've removed and reworked and so on. So just a couple more, photos of the site. So the ET cover construction at the green crosshatched area, it's the area where we didn't need to dig the tailings out, but we did need to cap them to isolate them from surface infiltration and so on. Some technical graphs over here if you're interested. Yeah, so here's kind of a, I think this is the end land use slide. Okay, so it's just kind of this property is owned by Butte Silver Bowl, and we have an agreement with them that says this is how we're going to leave it. So it's all going to be graded, some parking lot expansion, and they'll have pretty much usable property at the end of this. Timeline. So we've completed a couple of the early things, north parking lot expansion, all project waste, all the actual contaminants have been removed now. Whatever's going on now is backfilling or reconstruction or construction of infrastructure and so on. So, and you may have seen an article in the Standard a couple of weeks ago or a week ago that kind of captured that, said that this is the end of the wastes. We had the last few buckets coming out, which was a real nice story and a real nice milestone for the state and for the program as well, and the community especially. We are going to be pretty much wrapping the project up by July, is the bottom line. At that point, I mean, there is going to be some ongoing monitoring and revegetation, but as far as any of the major construction, I mean, by then all the infrastructure, Civic Center Road will be reopened. Butte Silver Bow will have some parcels that they can develop as they see fit. So, and that's more or less the schedule we had set out from the beginning. So we're proud to say we're on schedule on this project. It didn't creep much. It didn't creep at all. So budget, I think we reported last year that we were starting to get a clearer picture on how the financials worked out. Our original budget, based on original estimates, engineers' estimates, and so on, we put aside $37 million. Of that 37, the Butte Silver Bow shop replacement portion, which was necessary to allow this to happen, came in at 14.5, which was our, within our budget, or the budget that we allotted them. So then the remaining funds, 22.5, is what went into the actual removal and capping and so on, all this other stuff that we're doing. At this point in time, and we are getting fairly near the end, and these numbers are getting a little bit more firm, we think we're going to be under budget against that $37 million figure, between $5 and $7 million. That's good news, obviously. I think there's some things that happened here that really contributed to that. I really do think the agreement with Montana Resources and our ability to use bigger equipment and not have to, that was huge. And we had, especially your current contractor had access to the right kind of equipment. So we had some real significant efficiencies. So that's a good news story, I think. So this might be the last bucket or that day. I don't know if that's the picture. I think it is. Yeah. Anyway, it is. Okay. Yay. So anyway, I mean, so for the money we spent on the direct removal, $17 million, I mean, what did we do? What did we accomplish? We moved over 1.9 million cubic yards of material, removed 650,000 cubic yards of groundwater saturated waste, which is what the whole point of the project was, and took that all to a safe location without using public roads. We capped it. During the course of the project, the first slide I showed you had that water ponding in the bottom of our excavation. This wasn't part of the original project design, but we opportunistically said, well, we have access to that water. Well, we can get at it. We put in a series of sump pumps and a pipeline, and actually it's a surface pipeline, and we're working on trying to work with British Petroleum or ARCO to make it permanent, but basically piped it over to Montana Resources and put it in their process ponds, and they're using it like they use copper laden water, which they're good at. So And then, yeah, by the end of it, we will have rebuilt all the infrastructure, installed new infrastructure, and made it suitable really for reuse in an urban area, which is not what it was suitable for before. So anyway, just an overview of how to the budget piece, just so you know. I mean, I told you we're going to be under our original estimate, but how did we pay for this in the first place? Well, the funds to pay for the Parrot project came from three basic pots of money. First was the Butte Groundwater Fund, which Miranda spoke about earlier. We transferred, and this occurred over a couple different transfers in 2016, 2019, and 2020. But we transferred out 5.2 million from that. Then the Upper Clark Fork Restoration Fund contributed $16.5 million. That sum was equivalent, or the same money that had been transferred from EPA, or with the approval of EPA, back actually by DEQ, to NRD from Silverboat Creek, the excess from that. And then Butte Area 1 contributed 15.3, which is a little more than their original contribution in the original Butte Area 1 plan, but it was necessary to get it all trued up. This is really super complicated, but it shows you how complicated the finances of the project were. It's basically a flow chart of money that went into the project. Now that we think we're going to have an excess, the question is, well, where does that excess go? Well, it goes back to where it came from, and in the same percentages. So you can see, and this is in your packet if you want to look at it more carefully. You can see where money went in and then where it's going to come back. There's also other things going on in this chart that aren't germane to Parrot per se. There's a piece over on the far left that has to do with the Butte consent decree and the Blacktail Creek remediation work, which also is anticipated to have some leftovers, which will again flow back into the Upper Clark Fork Restoration Fund as well as into the Butte Area 1 Fund. So apologize for how complicated it is, but that's kind of how it all kind of came together. And again, I don't want to dwell on this. I know I'm probably taking more time than I should have. If you have any questions on this one, this is one you might need to go home and look at. Give us a call. I'm happy to walk you through it. We've done it for other folks and want to be real transparent about where the money came from, where it's going, who made what decisions about it, and what it's resulted in. I do have to say, like, from the standpoint of Butte Area 1, when we started the project, the Butte Area 1 plan balance was about $11 or $12 million, and I think at the end of the day, if everything works according to plan here, I think Butte Area 1 is going to be roughly back to where it started. I mean, that still is not enough for the community of Butte, but we think the arrangement and the consent decree and all that will get us where we need to be as good as we can. So fingers crossed. So anyway, there's the blue water again. So that's why we're here. So anyway, I apologize if I went on too long or I'm too excited about the project, but I actually am. So questions?
Thank you, Harley. Any questions in the room on the Parrot Tailings project?
Christy Beal, I have a comment. Huge, complex project, and to bring it in under budget's amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Elizabeth Erickson, just with a comment too. When we started this project, we did 3 years of public meetings before we finally decided to go forward on this. And from the community, this was the number one thing that they wanted to see happen with these restoration funds. And it's amazing to get to this side of it where it's done. And we've been monitoring water quality. We're already seeing the improvements in water quality here. And the impact to the basin, I think, is just amazing. And this is one of those legacy projects that just goes on giving year after year. So yeah. glad we're there, and I'm excited to see what it looks like when we're all done too. So.
Yeah, Elizabeth makes a great point. The thanks really go out to the Butte community. They supported this and supported us and were there when we needed them. And this is their legacy and we're happy to have been part of it. So thanks.
Thank you. Brian, any public comment? No hands raised? Great. With that, we will move to Doug to talk about the revision process and proposed schedule.
Thank you, Doug Martin again. I'm just going to go over a quick schedule for what we have in the plans for 2023. The 2019 Aquatic and Terrestrial Restoration Plans calls for a revision in 2023. So the program has been ramping up and collecting some of our own ideas about what needs to be revised in 2023. But we did try to set a rough schedule for how we're going to lay this out. And we will be following through this process, the process that we've used in the last two revisions, which also follows right along with the guidelines that are provided to us in the final process plan, which lays out the procedures for how to revise the restoration plan. And in January and February, we'll start with a advisory council meeting to seek their recommendations and talk to them about what we're going to do and present some of our proposed revisions, the program's proposed revisions. And at the same time, we'll also be soliciting projects from the public and revisions from the public. In the original development of this plan, we recognized that the state agencies, the program, the council don't know all the issues in the Upper Clark Fork. So we do want to seek public input and the public's ideas of what type of restoration plans we should be implementing. So there will be a public solicitation for revisions as well as projects that we could implement. Between February and June, the program will take all of those comments that we get, develop a response to comments and evaluate those projects and that type of those comments against the NRD or the natural resource damage criteria to make sure that they comply with DOI regulations, as well as to ensure that they fit with the priorities of the basin that we have in order to meet our goals. I did talk to the council last week. We probably will add a council meeting between February and June to seek their recommendation on where we want to go with some of these projects. For instance, recreation. Do we want to include recreation in the next revision or not? So we will probably schedule additional meeting in there. In June, about halfway through the year, we'll have a draft restoration plan that we will present to the council as well as the public, and then evaluate those comments over the summer, and then have a draft final restoration plan that we present to the council again, where they would make their recommendation to the trustee restoration council, this council, and the governor as far as how they feel about where we should go with the plan. We will have another TRC council meeting on that plan later or in the fall to make a recommendation to the governor. So this schedule does follow pretty much what we had proposed in 2018. I would indicate that although in 2018 we had this whole process ending in September, we learned that that's not possible. We can't get it done in 9 months. So our goal is to hope to get this to the governor for his consideration next December. So are there any questions on the revision process?
Seeing none. Any online? Great. Thank you, Doug. Is there any additional comment about anything that we've heard today? Any questions that have come up? I'm looking to Brian. He does not appear to have anyone online who has additional comment.
Excuse me, Madam Chair.
Yes.
This is John Sesso. I had a question about this schedule on the revision.
Great.
So
Go
sorry
ahead,
to
go ahead
not-
and proceed.
not have my hand up properly. Doug.
Maybe you were just raising your hand in
Yeah,
the
well-
room and we couldn't see you.
I
So,
I
but
don't
Doug
know
is here and available to answer questions on the schedule.
Doug, I'm curious on that first box on your schedule there, the solicitation of public input. Can we expect, and then it says minimum of 30 days. Um, can you elaborate a little more about how you would advise members of the public, BAO members, et cetera, to prepare to suggest revisions? Is that something we should be working on now for a submittal to you in January or February? I'm a little bit vague on the difference between the first box and then the June 23 council meeting.
John, this is Doug Martin. So in January, February timeframe, and it may run into, I would imagine it might run into March as well, we will provide information to the public that explains the proper, or not the proper, but the method of how to submit comments and the type of comments and projects that should be submitted. This will be very similar to what was put out in 2011 for the 2012 plan, as well as what we put out in 2015 and again in 2018. Yeah, so basically, yeah, we will lay out a detailed process for, if you want to provide a comment on how you think the plan should be revised, you can provide that. If you want to submit a project, we will provide the guidelines for what that project, what requirements that project would have to meet, either, for instance, the natural resource damage criteria, or an outline of the priority areas or the prioritizations within the current aquatic and terrestrial restoration plans. So during that solicitation, we will be providing that information.
Okay. And one follow-up, would a revision, I guess, would the revision of the aquatic and terrestrial resource restoration plans include anything having to do with the change in allocation of dollars and resources associated with dollars remaining from the Streamside Tailings project? Would this be the right time to? You have told me in the past that, if you want to suggest how, or to, in my case, affirm or confirm that those dollars that are left over would be spent above Deer Lodge in the Upper Clark Fork and its tributaries, this revision would be the time to do that?
Actually, John, this is Doug again. This revision would not be the time to do that, John, because right now there are no SST Silver Bow Creek remediation excess dollars available within the Upper Clark Fork. All those dollars were transferred to the Parrot for that Parrot project. When the Parrot project is complete and those dollars come back to the Upper Clark Fork River Restoration Plan, the refund that Harley talked about, those dollars coming back to the Upper Clark Fork will come back as SST dollars or remediation excess. And that would be the time we would have to, in order to expend those dollars, we would have to work with the advisory council to go through the process to amend the restoration plan to allocate those dollars. So that the allocation of the SST dollars will be a separate process.
Okay.
And So you're hesitating there, John, and the only reason I'm saying that is because today and as of January 1, 2023, there are no SST dollars in the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Restoration Fund.
Yeah, I can appreciate that reality of the actual cash situation, but you and Harley have described to me that when you connect this to the consent decree and the Blacktail Creek project and the funds remaining from that orange box that you had in your that Harley had in his slide on the paying of the Parrot, I'm just trying to verify and confirm on behalf of the citizens of Butte that the dollars that go back to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin Aquatic and Terrestrial funds and then get put back in the Streamside Tailings area, Streamside project dollars where they came from, that those dollars are available to projects in the Silverbow Creek corridor and the Upper Clark Fork. And I was led to believe the last time we had this conversation that this revision, that we anticipate that those dollars are coming back, if nothing less than the dollars that'll be available on the under budget dollars, the 5 to 7 million. Those are coming back to the main fund and then get reallocated back out. I was just assuming that we needed to put our foot forward and on suggesting projects and assuring ourselves that those dollars can be made available to projects in the first mile. Isn't that the case? Wouldn't it be part and parcel to the revision of, for example, the aquatic plan, that we start planning for that reality?
This is Doug again. I agree, John. It would be important to start planning for that. The hard part is we don't know the amount of funds that are coming back. And we can sit down and look at this again. But it's my recollection of the final process plan that when those dollars are allocated to the Upper Clark Fork River Basin, that's when they would be allocated, not before. So I can look into this further and have further discussions with others on this, but it's my thought that this allocation would be separate once those funds are available.
This
Okay,
is Chris. This is Chris. I want to jump in. John, thank you for bringing this up. I think it's an issue you've spent a lot of time on, much more time on than most people around the table, although Elizabeth probably is also familiar. I think that we would be unwise to block off any conversation about dollars that we have a pretty good idea that are coming. And as part of the advice, we don't know yet, so we can't, we will not be able to allocate those funds. But I think that we should have the conversation so it could be part of this advisor, it's a part of this planning process, if that makes sense. Doug, would you agree?
Yes, I would. Yes.
Yeah, I think it would be short-sighted to say, well, let's talk about it when we know exactly how much money's coming back and then start all over again. Does that make sense to you, John?
Yeah, yes, thank you very, very much. That I just think that any revisions to the aquatic plan and in my world, my view, the terrestrial plan, and any projects considered should be in the context of the whole, not just in isolation of these other dollars that will be coming in, coming back, coming in to the program. And I think it should be part of the conversation this winter and spring in the context of revising these restoration plans. And so I guess as a BNRC member, I would be bringing that up. And then as a citizen of Butte, I think that it's important to have the conversation about, what we would do with those dollars, confirm that those dollars are available for projects, et cetera, in the context of revising these restoration plans in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you. We will work with you and the folks in Butte to make sure you're heard. At one point, I believe Director Warsick. Oh, he had his hand up. Are there any other comments or questions in the room, online? Brian indicates no. Thank you all for your work today. We look forward to the next step, which is the revision of the plan. And keep up the good work. And with that, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.